Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's taking a look at a Russian model of 1828 flintlock musket that was captured at the Battle of Inkerman in the Crimean War. It's a really cool piece of history here. So we'll start with a little bit of background on the battle itself. This was the last major open field battle in the Crimean War before the Siege of Sevastopol. And it was basically the Russian army's last attempt that they had before the siege to break through what they thought would be a weak point in the primarily British lines around Sevastopol. So the Franco-British army had landed in Crimea in September. There had been some fighting leading up to this point. This would be one of the larger battles of the Crimean War. We're looking at 60,000 troops on the Russian side, of whom about 30,000 actively participated. That, by the way, is part of the problem that with the Russian leadership in the battle. Had they committed the extra men that they had available, they probably could have won. The British had something like 9,500 men, and the French contributed another 4,000 or so to the fighting in support. At any rate, the British had this position on a little hilly mountainous area called Inkerman. The Russians, after doing a little probing attack, decided that this would probably be a weak point in the British lines, and they could attack here and break through the British line. As it turned out, this would not be the case. The Russians had a two-pronged attack on November 5th, 1854, which, I didn't do this accidentally, was exactly 166 years ago on the date that this video is originally being posted. It was an interesting day. It was a very foggy day. It came after several days of drizzle and rain. The ground was very muddy. Visibility was low. A lot of units throughout the day, throughout this fighting, large units would be broken up into much smaller units, like battalion-sized units, because they just lost communication with each other, and there was so much fog that it was difficult to see what was going on across different parts of the battlefield. So this would devolve into a lot of hand-to-hand combat, a lot of close-range combat, and a lot of fighting on individual initiative of relatively small units. Now, the Russians had the numerical superiority here, but they were hampered by a number of things. The battle was not particularly well planned. The Russian leadership didn't have good maps of the battlefield, even though they chose the battlefield. Russian small arms, and here's where we can get to this guy, were at a distinct disadvantage to the British. So the best case for the Russian small arms were a series of percussion rifles, or percussion muskets, that had been adopted in the 1840s, including actually a lot of these flintlocks that were updated to a percussion action in 1844, or the pattern of 1844. The Russian guns are all 69 or 70 caliber smoothbore muskets. They are not particularly accurate. They're incredibly long. This thing has a 41-inch barrel on it. The British, on the other hand, and all of the British units that participated in Inkerman, were armed with 1853 pattern rifles. They fired the Minié ball, which is a conical bullet that has a hollow base, and the idea was you could make the whole bullet a little smaller in diameter than the rifling, which made it very easy to load. These are all muzzle loading guns, so you have to pour powder down the barrel and then set a bullet on the muzzle and then ram the bullet all the way down the barrel before you can fire. And if you had the classic problem with rifles was you had to engrave that rifling on the bullet as you rammed it all the way down the barrel, and it took a lot of force and it was relatively slow to load. What Minié came up with was a bullet that could be undersized and thus easy to load, because you didn't have to engrave it onto the rifling very deeply. But when you fired it, that conical base would actually expand under pressure and fit into the rifling with a nice tight gas seal and provide you all of the accuracy that you would normally get. So it was a way to get the speed of a smoothbore musket with the accuracy of a rifle. And this was relatively new technology at this point. The British troops at Inkerman were fully equipped with Minié firing rifles, percussion rifles. The Russians all had smoothbores, and a lot of the Russian forces at Inkerman actually had flintlocks like this one. And the wet weather was, so not only did they have inferior accuracy with the smoothbore muskets, but the guys with flintlocks had significantly impaired reliability because of how wet everything was, and that wasn't a problem with the percussion cap guns. So let's take a closer look at this specific rifle, and I'll show you how we know it was at Inkerman, which is pretty cool. So in 1809, the Russian military had adopted a whole new family of small arms that was pretty much directly copied from the French 1777 patterns. And that development, that basis on French small arms, would continue with the 1828 flintlocks that we see here. There wasn't much change in the guns over this time period, but the French at the time were considered the gold standard of European military organization and armament. And so it really makes sense that a country like Russia, without as much industrialization or military experience at this point, would copy the French. They were good guns. So this is basically a copy of the French 1822 pattern flintlock. Here on the lock plate, we have a marking from the Tula arsenal. Tula has been around for a very long time. This particular musket was manufactured there in 1836, and we have matching dates, interestingly, on a whole bunch of the parts. There is an 1836 date on the top of the barrel. Note here we have the rear sight way back on the action. The lock on the opposite side is also marked 1836. Unfortunately, it looks like someone over-tightened this at some point and cracked the stock there. There is one mismatched part, and that's the barrel band here, dated 1827. But the front barrel band is 1836. The nose cap is 1836. And while we're out here, I'll point out the brass or gunmetal front sight right behind the nose cap. And of course, we have a lug for the socket bayonet that this would have taken. At the back, we have a cheek rest on the left side of the stock. And this is the remnant of a Russian Imperial Eagle that has worn down almost to the point, well, you can't really make it out anymore, but you can see that it used to be there. Similarly, on the right side of the stock, we can see the remains of the original stock cartouche, but again, those are worn down to the point of being illegible. We've got one more date, and that's on the trigger guard, 1836. And then on the guard itself is the coolest part. This has been inscribed from Inkerman by J.D.V. We have no idea who that was. A lot of Russian arms were taken as souvenirs by British soldiers at the battle, and it was primarily a British battle, much more so than the French. The French were there, but more in a supporting role and about a quarter as many troops as the British. And then this is dated November 5th, 1854. So that bit of inscription is really cool. I think that gives this the provenance of being a captured war trophy rifle all the way back from the Crimean War, and that helps explain why it remained in its original flintlock configuration. Of course, a lot of these guns in Russian service by 1854 had already been updated, but the ones that weren't mostly would be in years to come. So this one survived without that modification because it came home with a British soldier as a trophy. Just for the record, I want to point out a couple quick things. I don't think the ramrod is correct. It doesn't come all the way back. It's not long enough. I also don't believe that this is an original Russian sling. I'm not sure exactly what the sling is. It's definitely an old sling, but I'm pretty sure it's not the one that was originally on this rifle. Now, in terms of practical utility, these guns were well made. Tula was a good arsenal. And while some people might disparage the guns on the basis of the Russian troops' performance, really none of that is particularly fair. The guns were well made. The troops' training was seriously lacking. There was very little actual practice firing done, and a lot of what was done using clay bullets just to save on the cost of lead bullets. There was a lot more attention paid to parade drill than there was to actual combat. And those deficiencies would come back to really bite the Russian forces when they went up against some really crack troops like the British, especially British troops armed with significantly more accurate and better, more modern firearms. Russian small arms from the muzzle-loading period are really actually very rare in the United States, in Western Europe, and kind of everywhere in collectors' markets. With all of the conflicts that Russia has been through, a lot of these guns were either destroyed in fighting at various times, or they were collected up and basically recycled, melted down for the materials in them at various times. And very few of these survive. With the 1828 musket in particular, most of them were updated to percussion pattern in 1844. And so it's far easier to find one of these in its percussion form than it is to find one that is still an original flintlock. So I think it's a really cool example, even if you're not hugely interested in the Crimean War specifically. I think there are a lot of interesting lessons that can be learned from it, and it's really cool to find a rifle or a musket like this that has a direct tie to a specific event in that conflict. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.